Yes, it's What a Boast, a celebration of Reeves and Mortimer. Please welcome your hosts for this podcast, MJ Price and Paula Wiseman.
Hello and welcome to Quite a Boast, a podcast dedicated to the work and genius of Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer. My name is Matt Price, previously of the long-running radio show The MJ Price Moments and founder of the Reeves and Mortimer Depository of Curious Stuff Facebook group.
And my name is Paula Wiseman of the Divine Comedians podcast.
Joining us today, we have someone who became friends with Jim Moir at art school and went on to appear on stage with Jim and Bob from the pubs and clubs of South East London to the nationwide tours at the height of their fame. He went on to become a very funny comedian in his own right and is also a qualified pilot. Please enter the Novelty Island paddock, the human joke box, Dorian Crook.
Hey!
Did you find all that out about me?
We were saying there's very little about you online, Dorian. You're very, very secretive.
I'm not. I don't know. I've got a website and everything. If I wouldn't have that, would I? Website, Facebook, that's where you found it all out, I suppose.
Years of research, Dorian. Years of research. Being an obsessive fan.
Yeah. You used to get the Fan Club magazine.
I did indeed, yes.
Still go?
No, it folded mid-90s. I've got a big pile of them.
No, we have to do that to make it fit in the envelope.
And now we've started.
So let's start a little bit by chatting a bit about you, Dorian. So you met Jim at art college. Were you always arty? Were you an arty kid?
No. Well, maybe sort of, how we should say, at home, but not at school. Because I was interested in playing. It was an interest I inherited from my father. And I sort of did the more sciencey stuff at school. And I became an air traffic controller for a living. So that worked in that respect. But then I decided that I didn't want to do the same thing all my life, maybe. And the art thing was in the back of my head, but never been able to do it at school because you couldn't combine the two. So when I left air traffic control for a while, I decided to go to art college before I got too comfortable in a nice regular job and do it while I was in my early 20s. So
what's that called, Smith?
I picked the wrong time of the year. The academic year, so I could only do a sort of part-time. I was in the middle of the academic year, so I was signing on, as everyone was in the 80s, I believe, and so you do 2 days a week on a part-time course to get you ready for applying.
Right.
That's where I met Jim.
Because Jim was on a part-time course as well, was he?
Yes.
Yeah, right, okay.
It's hard though, isn't it, to go from air traffic controlling into art? Was it quite easy to get into? They usually look for all these different things to get into.
Air traffic control or art?
Art, I suppose.
For me, it's more difficult. No, well, yeah, I thought that's what you meant, but actually for me, it was the reverse. I knew quite a lot about aeroplanes and air traffic control because I was a plane spotter and my dad was a pilot. So that was relatively easy to get into. But art, well, I knew nothing of. So I was a bit of an outsider. I didn't have any background in it, or, I didn't have many friends or parent or family or anything background. So, it was actually probably to get into is probably more difficult for me than what you might expect would be the other way around. But yeah.
Obviously, Jim has gone on, especially recently with the Painting Bird series, to become very well known as an artist in his own right, away from the comedy. Did he show promise at the time? Could you see that he was going to go on to big things?
Yes. Well, I don't know if I saw big things, but I found him very inspirational. At the time, I always said this. It sounds like the sort of thing people only say after somebody's died, doesn't it? But I always say this because I suppose not everyone knows that he did it beforehand. And, there's a thing of sort of people who get famous for music and that go and doing art on the side, and people are slightly suspicious of it. But he was very good. And I remember taking him to an interview that he had at, I'm not sure it was Goldsmiths or Camberwell. I can't remember now. I think we had to go to Camberwell. We lived in South London. I took him in my Hillman Minx with his paintings in the back, and some of them fell out in Peckham High Street. But we recovered them, and he went to the interview, and I seem to remember them saying they didn't. I seem to remember them saying that he already knew what he was doing, and therefore they didn't take him as a student because he was quite accomplished and had his own thing going on.
It was too good.
Well, maybe it looks like it. Yeah. So he worked in an art gallery for a while. He carried on painting and stuff. But I remember when I was at college, I spent quite a lot of time with him and another friend of ours, John Irvin, who you may be aware of, who worked a lot on the tours and early shows. And we used to do some little painting or drawing and photography projects together, as well as the curriculum. And they were probably as influential as anything that happened in the college in the early days, certainly.
Yeah. Did you think your career was going to be in art, or were you
for a short period, I fancied myself as that, painter in a garret type thing. But I very veered away from that because I realised I couldn't paint. And so I went into making video, sort of avant-garde videos and stuff like that, like you do.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, so what was your discipline when you were doing the course?
Film and video.
Right.
Yes. But it was on an art course rather than a filmmaking course. So, it wasn't very technical. It was more, it was approached in a fine art sense.
Yeah.
The sort of videos that no one wants to look at, I think.
Was Fred Elwood at the art school as well?
He wasn't at that art school, but he had been associated with the art world, and I know he worked in an art college, I think. I'm not sure whether he'd done art training. I'm sure he must have done, because he was quite creative as well.
Yeah. So that was the group, the nucleus for the original Big Night Out live shows, yourself and obviously Jim and Fred and John Irving. Yeah. Was Jack Dent as well? Sort of time.
Still, he wasn't around at the very beginning. I mean, he was around, but he wasn't in London. He was still in the north.
Right.
So he came around a bit later, and I'm not even sure. I was only sort of vaguely involved at the very beginning. I think it was quite a surprise to me when Jim announced he was doing this. But I went along, so very quickly sort of became. I can't remember whether it was their choice or whether I availed myself in. I can't remember quite how, but there was a need for somebody to put a mask on or go on stage and do something silly, which I was quite up for doing, even though I had no experience of it before, and I had no background in that, and I found I rather enjoyed it. So I think soon after that, I started to think that it would be more fun to be, if you like, metaphorically at least speaking, in front of the camera rather than behind it. So
I just wondered, how much input was Jim did he kind of give you his ideas and then sort of that's how it played out, or did you have any input into what you were doing?
Well, I mean, I was only a very minor character. So at that stage, ever really, but certainly that stage, he put the show together, and occasionally I think I was the only one with a car, so I would drive some of the props to the venue, and they would go, why don't you put this on and maybe do that? So I wasn't sitting. I don't think I was there. Him and John probably did more sort of preparation because they lived together, and he came up with the shows, as I recall, and possibly the way it happened was something like this. Not 100% accurate, probably, but they would probably need someone to come on whilst he was getting changed, or when there was a gap. And I said, and maybe you could put this mask on and come on as I remember once going on in the very early days when it was in a bar in Deptford, with the first place it was before it was at the Goldsmiths, I think.
Was that Winston's?
Yeah, Winston's, yeah. And I went on stage with my girlfriend at the time as Peters and Lee, who were a 70s easy listening duo that had met some success on Opportunity Knocks or similar sort of program.
Welcome Home, like
Britain's Got Talent type thing, yeah. Blind singer and his blonde lady companion. So I had some sunglasses, but they didn't seem dark enough. So I put black. Now, he had very dark glasses because he was blind.
Yeah.
Mr. Peters, or was he Lee?
Good question.
He had those very dark glasses, more dark than your average sunglasses. So I thought my sunglasses weren't really dark enough. So I put black paper behind them. Of course, I couldn't see anything. And but we sang. I don't think we actually sang one of their songs. We might have sung. I don't think we had one of their songs available, so we might have done an ABBA song instead. And very professional, as you can see. But again, I can't quite remember what you couldn't see.
Yeah,
I think that was their idea rather than mine. And then a couple of other little bits where I would come on and, hand something to somebody. And then, yes. And then the one that you probably know better is the character that I had, again, only for about 30 seconds on each show, remember, called the Toff, who was a sort of, again, I can't quite remember. I think we might have come up with it together somehow. Just a sort of like a posh aristocrat with a ruddy face and a taste for drink, who came on and mumbled a couple of bad jokes. And
which of course led to the
Matt was my big break in terms of the Big Night Out live show.
Of course, the Toff had a catchphrase as well, didn't he, Dorian?
It wasn't no catchphrase. They came on after I did it once. I think the whole idea was that it was something to fill in while they got changed between doing something and then coming back as themselves. I think Bob had joined by this stage.
Right.
When I say they, whereas when it was at Winston's and the early time at the Goldsmith, it was just Jim. But then Bob joined in. So I think by that time that Bob had joined. So they might have been, say, the Living Carpets or something like that. Then they'd go off and change into their normal gear. And I would come on and do a couple of gags as a Toff. And then they would come rushing on and they would shout, "Am I allowed to say a swear word?"
You can say whatever you like, Dorian.
Yeah, disappointed with something hard to say, "Fuck off, Toff." And the audience joined in. And so that's how it became a catchphrase because there was a lot of call and response.
Yeah.
Going no. So the catchphrases were quite a big thing of it. Or not catchphrases so much in the normal sense of a comedian's catchphrase.
Yeah. Interaction.
I have to learn.
You call them.
That could be only catchphrases anymore.
I know.
Anyway, that was more of a call and an audience response.
Yeah, the audience interaction.
Well, I didn't really mind. I never found it, it didn't bother me because I was thinking to be, it was like, like when you get a sort of silly nickname, it's almost like a mark of respect. I had status.
Yeah. Did anyone ever shout at you in the street though? That's the worry time.
No, because it didn't go into the TV series.
No.
I still, the show was about 2.5 hours long at the Albany Empire by then.
Yeah.
And when the TV people started arriving, and then it eventually got this well-deserved TV series, then you have to move a 2.5 hour show down to 25 minutes or so.
Yeah.
So a lot of things had to go. It wasn't, to be honest, it wasn't an integral part of the show. And you don't have to do, when you're filming, you don't have to have someone come on while you get changed. You can just stop recording.
Yeah.
And also the catchphrase wasn't suitable for TV at that time. And again, it wasn't that important a part of the show from their point of view, I'm sure. So
No, but we're talking about it now, Dorian. Do you know what I mean? It's
we talk about it, and in the business occasionally, it's only ever been shouted to me once, but that was like in circles, if you like, not in the street.
Can you remember when Bob joined?
I can't give you the date.
No, 8:30 on a Tuesday.
Yes, it sounds like a police interview now, doesn't it? Where were you on the night of report in 1990? Let's go through this one more time.
We'll catch him out eventually.
I could remember. I sort of vaguely remember that. Well, you know the story, I'm sure. He was introduced to. He was taken down to the show by an old friend from the north, who appeared from in the pub that he went to regularly, who told him about it. An enthusiast of the show, who told Bobby Mass to see this, and so Bob went down. I think I may not have even been there the first time, so I may just be repeating what I've read or heard, which is a bit useless because that's not what I'm here for, is it? But anyway, my memory is that he was introduced to it, and then he turned up and got on well with Jim, and one way or another they got chatting, and he got roped in and more. So
yeah. So I mean, did the dynamic change at all when Bob got involved?
Well, I suppose
between the group that was there initially.
It's difficult to say, isn't it? Because I wasn't part of the creative team really.
Yeah.
I wasn't there at any sort of regular meetings about what to do. I'm not sure it was that So I think Jim did it at home mainly. I imagine John Irving had quite a lot of input when he was doing it on his own because they shared a flat and a similar sense of humour. And John Irving used to appear occasionally, I think. And so I suppose it must have done, but I don't remember. I don't remember it sort of feeling significant in terms of. I mean, it was very much for me. It was a social thing, really. At that point, I had never had aspirations to go on stage. I was pleased that I'd become involved, and it was fun. And some shows I would just be a punter, watching. At the Goldsmith days, I think I only went on stage once doing maybe something. Maybe I might have been one of the. I don't know if I was. I might have gone on and done something, but it was only really when it got to the Albany I seem to remember that I did the Toff, and I was a regular. But even then, I wasn't a necessary regular because I was away. I remember being away for a couple of weeks in Canada and missing it a bit.
Yeah.
I think I was talking to my girlfriend at the time on the phone and saying, "Oh, can you ring him and ask him if I can do the one when I come back?" I was kind of making sure I kept my foot in, if you like, rather than being an essential part. Yeah.
And of course, Fred became Les during this period as well.
Yeah.
Did that character evolve, or was he sort of given to Fred?
Well, I think it, like always, they come on once, and I suppose I'm guessing here again because I'm reading Jim's mind from 35 years ago. I suppose some things work, and some people are good to work with, or some people enjoy it, and if it works, obviously that worked with the audience. That must have worked well, and it became a regular thing. I think he was more hovering around in the background, and used to do, as you know, of course, he was mute. So I think he could hover around in the background a bit, and then rather than come on and do something like because he didn't speak. So then eventually they gave him, I think, a little bit where he would come on and there would be almost like a silent movie bit where he would set up a table for an imaginary dinner party or something. And
I don't think I've ever heard his voice. Well,
he wouldn't have in his professional role. No. Maybe if you interview him, you might.
He's on the list. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Did Charlie Hickson and Paul Whitehouse sort of appear? Was that Albany Empire time?
They did. I remember them appearing at some point, both, just appearing at the venue and appearing on stage. I remember a character one of them did, and I can't remember which one, called. It was one of the big sort of one of the things that felt significant at the time in sort of comedy history was the fact that that Jim and Bob were in any way political comedians. That seemed to be the main thing going on at the time, and there was always a sort of underlying feel that that's not what's going on. And I seem to remember Charlie or Paul, but I can't quite remember which, did a character called Johnny Vitriol, who was a sort of ranting, anti-Thatcher type comedian, as was very popular in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
This was all around the turn of the decade, I think, almost exactly 1990-ish. I'm guessing, maybe 89 to 90, yeah.
Yeah, because I've spoken to Charlie in the past. I think Charlie came first, and he was just so impressed by what he saw. He then told Paul he had to come along and get involved.
Yes.
It's nice seeing all these different lines interjecting.
Yeah, it was always exciting going down there. I seem to remember it was on a Sunday, the one at the Albany, quite for a long time. And after a while, it sort of became a sort of quite a fun game, even if I wasn't performing, to sort of see which either not so much celebrities or TV people, TV production people that were turning up, or in one case, Jonathan Ross, who was a bit of both. He had a company and he was also famous. I think we all went for a curry beforehand, and he got some curry on his tie. Don't know why I remember that, but he was always quite well dressed, I suppose. And it's unusual to see, especially as they all live. TV people see we lived in this slightly odd corner of southeast London. I say odd because it was a bit unconnected in those days, transport-wise. So it felt a bit. It felt a bit more distant from London than perhaps it would do nowadays. And they all lived in slightly more affluent places like Hampstead and Islington. It felt quite funny to see the likes of them negotiating their way around southeast London, and then what's his name, Michael Gray, and was the BBC man, and who was the Channel 4 man? I can't remember, but one week he would be the head of commissioning man or the head of comedy or whatever they're called, the big man from the Channel 4 would be there. Who we sort of knew who they were roughly, and then next week in the BBC man and Jonathan Ross and
yeah, Channel 4 was still very new then, wasn't it? It had only been around for a couple of years.
probably, I don't remember, but I guess you must be right. Yeah,
I think it
82, I think it was started, wasn't it?
was it that far back?
Yeah.
no, I think it started in the mid '80s. Yeah,
I had in my mind 87. I don't know where that came from.
I won't get too geeky, but the first ever comic strip was on the first night, and that was 82.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
I remember the track.
So, like, talking about the early big night out days, so what memories do you have of those initial days? Was it quite shambolic, or was it like organised chaos? How would you describe it?
well, I suppose I didn't really have any. I didn't have any because I hadn't come from any show business
Yeah.
background. I didn't really have anything to compare it with. But it was pleasantly. I mean, no, it was professional, but in a sense that it was good. That's the important thing. It didn't sort of conform to the normal sort of routine of you see a show, but I probably haven't seen that many ensemble comedy shows.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know.
As you say, at that time it was probably stand-up, yeah. At that time it probably was stand-up.
Quite different from that, yeah. And I don't think I'd seen things like the League of Gentlemen and stuff like that, which is a group of people I hadn't started by then. I don't remember having much to compare it with. But like I say, it was sort of it was just always fun for me because these were people I hung out with socially anyway. And it was just fun to be part of what they were doing, and even if I wasn't performing that night, maybe the toff wasn't needed or something, and I went along, it was always a good atmosphere. It was always a good night out.
Yeah.
That was a big star in your diary almost.
That's the thing. You can never know at the time what something is going to become. Do you know what I mean? It's just a load of mates just pissing about in a room.
No, and I think if I couldn't make it for some reason, even if it was because I was on holiday or something, I was a little bit sad. Or if I couldn't go, maybe I was working. Because I think I'd gone back to working in air traffic control by then. So my occasionally I'd have to work very early in the morning. It might not have been a good idea to go out that night or something.
Yeah.
Not where you're in charge of
I'd be working
flight
late. So there was some times when I couldn't make it, and I used to feel, what happened last night? What was it like? It was that what people now call in the moment.
Yeah.
Can you remember the move to TV?
Yeah,
Excitement surrounding that.
Well, I remember the sort of build up to it with TV people coming, so it kind of felt a bit inevitable. So it wasn't a sudden shock. Yeah, but
Yeah. Did you have to change? Was there much that changed? Obviously, from doing something in a stage show that was 2 hours long, and then having to condense it into what we.
I don't think I was actually involved in that first. I don't think I was on stage at all for the first couple of first series of the thing like that. Like I say, the Toff character couldn't really fit into that, and so I think at that point I took a back seat. And I just enjoyed going down to the recordings again.
Yeah.
That replaced the Albany as the sort of our big night out in our own terms, not just called that. And so we'd always have tickets, and we'd go over to that was on a Friday, I seem to remember. So that was you've seen it was a Friday or a Saturday. It was over in Wandsworth. I forgot the name of the studio. Again, a bit of a trek from where we lived, but it was always, a train or taxis over there. And I think perhaps privileged status of the green room because of my background with them.
But your name is synonymous with Jim and Bob now. When people talk about the early days, your name is always mentioned, which is it's always a good thing.
Well, that's nice to know. It's nice to know. Yeah, I think I did see there was a documentary about them, wasn't there? On Panorama, not Panorama. What do you mean,
Omnibus?
What's that program that maybe there's
Omnibus or Arena? One of those was.
Yeah, what's the one
of those?
Malvin Bragg.
Oh, South Bank Show.
It might have been that. You probably know because you're.
I think it was Alan Yentob. I think it might have been an Omnibus.
Yeah, and I know they had an interview with Jonathan Ross and Alan Mark, who were the two men behind Channel X.
Yeah,
produced it, and I think there was an interview with them, and I remember being flattered that I was mentioned in that briefly. When they were being interviewed in the back of a limo or a taxi or something, and I went, "Oh, cool! What happened to Toff?" Yeah,
He's landing planes.
Yeah. Well, I was for 30. Until recently, I did that pretty much full time for 30 years. So, well, I say full time, but when I wasn't doing that, I was eventually did stand up on my own, as you mentioned. But
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, but Midnight Out, it just seemed to click. It clicked with a generation. Let's call it a generation of people. It was around that time that comedy was kind of becoming the new rock and roll, wasn't it? It was
That phrase was coined by a clever journalist. A couple of years later, Arena's show by Newman and Baddiel.
Yes.
So yeah.
A little bit later than them, but they were always a bit. But it is relevant, even if it wasn't used then, I suppose, because they were quite Jim in particular they were quite pop starish in their well,
Literally a pop star.
but they were it was I think because they had a lot of pop references in their show, which most comedians didn't, and that let the audience know that they knew what they were talking about, I suppose, and perhaps they got fans who were, I don't know, indie music fans or what have you, that maybe wouldn't otherwise have got into comedy. So if someone said, "Oh, you've got to see this, he's got a puppet that's meant to be Morrissey," I can imagine somebody who maybe not, who might have been a real music fan, who might not have been into comedy, for example, getting lured in by that.
And I think music journalists loved them as much as TV people. They made the cover of the NME several times. So that obviously lured music fans in as well. And of course, that led to the Big Night Out tours, which brought yourself back onto stage.
Yes, as I was going to say, I don't think I wasn't actually actively involved in those first TV series.
No.
But they did kindly invite me to join them on the tours. So then I was back in, so to speak. Well, not the first one. They didn't need me on the first one, but they said, "Oh, do you want to come along? It might be fun." So I came along anyway, and I jumped on the tour bus outside my flat in King's Cross, way up the A1, and went to do. This was the first tour, which was sort of university, perhaps 1990. Universities mainly, and I found that I was very excited just being part of the bus really with them. I mean, not in a fan kind of way because I was already friends with them. But it was nice.
Yeah.
It was nice that they were comfortable enough to let me join in, rather than just going off and that. So I was always there's always been a certain loyalty.
Oh, definitely.
Outside of the showbiz professionalism, I've always been rather grateful for. So yeah.
Was it a different type of audience now they were on TV?
Well, of course, yeah. And I remember, actually, no, maybe I got it wrong about getting on the bus, because I seem to remember I didn't go on the bus with them that tour at first to start with. I think I went and joined them in Leeds, and they'd already done a week. And I think I got the train to Leeds, and I turned up on my own. I remember this because I remember getting my hotel, and then I walked to the venue, and then I saw the queue outside, and that was quite an eye-opener for me, because I had, that sort of visual confirmation of how big they were.
Yeah.
Not only was there a queue, but there was people dressed as Les.
Yes.
With chives in their pocket, that kind of thing. And I thought, wow, they really got fans, Yeah, and then I think I joined them for the northern part of the tour, and actually in the end I did do some bits, because there was it Novelty Island or something? You mentioned the Paddock. I think there was another chap who was a friend of Simon Day's who'd gone along, and he did something in it, and he wasn't. And in the end, they said, "Oh, you can do it if you want." So I ended up actually sort of performing a bit on that tour, and in a sort of informal way.
Did you operate? Am I right in saying you operated Greg Mitchell, the Labrador, as well, Dorian, or not?
Yes, later on. Well, he was around. The second tour around, obviously, because dogs live for a long time. But he wasn't a showbiz dog at that point. He was probably being imagined in a prop room. Well, you probably know he didn't exist, of course, because he's not real. But yes, he is. He's real.
Oh, Dorian!
You were asking about did I ever get anybody call out Toff in the street? And I say no, because it wasn't on TV, so nobody knew. And not enough people knew it. And equally, nobody shouted out Greg Mitchell, because I wasn't seen on the TV thing when
you were under the desk.
I did meet someone at a party, at an event a few years ago, and somehow it came up that I'd worked with Nick and Bob, and they went, "Oh yeah, I'm a big fan." And he went, "Oh, what did you do?" I said, "I operated the dog." They went, "The dog, Greg Mitchell." They went, "Oh, can you sign First time I signed an autograph. Well, I had to sign it as Greg Mitchell.
As Greg Mitchell.
Well, I didn't know whether it was a paw print or.
That's mad.
So, yeah, but I wasn't the voice of Greg Mitchell. That was
no.
I operated him. That was all my main job on the. Well, I did a bit in the first half on the. So the next tour in '91, I think I was a proper employed part of the gang, and I did something at the beginning, which was mainly a bit of what you mentioned, was the island, the paddock, and then there's an interval, and then in the second half, before the curtains came up again, I had to go and sit behind the desk for about 20 minutes doing nothing, whilst the rest of the show went on, and at some point, well, perhaps longer actually, half an hour maybe, because I was only there to operate at the end of the second half. So lest there be any suggestion of glamour in the world of showbiz, I can assure you that sitting underneath Jim's arse about 40 minutes with nothing to do apart from hope that he hadn't had too much unpleasant food the night before and that they hadn't left me anything too unpleasant as a magazine to read, was I mean, I was happy. I enjoy it. I still look back on it with very happy memories, but not that particular moment, but the whole thing. And actually it was great because I didn't really have, the other thing of course was I didn't really have a huge amount of responsibility because unlike them, or maybe somebody who was doing like a warm-up, like a comedian doing a warm-up show, I didn't really have a huge responsibility because I had mainly mute parts. And I just had to, as the old actors say, come on at the right time and not knock anything over. And even if I had knocked something over, probably nobody would have minded. I had to come on in Novelty Island, and I think I was tied up with some chains.
Yes, there's footage of you on the, I think it's the Smeller Reeves Mortimer tour, and you're in the paddock. I think you have a cardboard box on your head, and you're an escapologist in some chains.
Oh, that's good. Yes, and I had a load of chains around me. Yes, yeah. And John Irvin did the music. There was some sort of tense, fanatic music from anything as I was playing this very far. And he, for his own amusement, no doubt, sort of stretched this out by a couple of bars every night. The first time, I only had to spend like 5 seconds escaping, and then he'd add another bar or two and music. So after 30 nights, I was there for about a minute or so. Not really doing anything on stage.
It is very funny.
Yeah.
So that all would have been also Simon Day,
He was
Mike
Mike
Wattam, yeah.
I have a feeling that the one that Simon Day was on was one tour, and then perhaps if you included the university one, the third one was the one with Mike Wattam. Because I only sort of informally joined the university one. Then I did the first big sort of theatrical big theatres tour, and the second one, and we took a bit of organising because I was working then. I managed to get the time off, there was a couple of days when it was no shows and I was able to go back, but I managed to work it out without having to lie to anyone, which is quite good. Because actually, I have to say, it's not very interesting for your listeners, but the people I worked for actually, I didn't have to pretend. Like you hear of people who have a proper job, who get into music or showbiz in some way and have to sort of make various excuses about dying grandmothers and stuff to skive off. And I didn't go down that route. I told them what I was doing, and I didn't have to really worry at that point because I basically used all my holiday for that tour in '94. So we must have started a tour in '94, I think, in the early part of '94, which would be one that Mike was on probably.
Yeah, that'd be the same.
That took a little bit of. That did take a bit of organising to. At one point, I wasn't sure if I could do it, and I was a bit worried about that because I didn't want to be not involved, and but I managed to work it out, and then I got offered around about soon after my own show in Edinburgh, and then I was beginning to run out of holiday, so I did have to do a bit of negotiation. But even then, I told them up front what was happening, and I had quite a sympathetic boss, and I had somebody who was spare that was supposed to retire, and he basically didn't retire for a couple of weeks longer. So I'd go to Edinburgh because I'd used all my holiday guides on the Vic and Bob, so I had a real busy year. Yeah.
Because just before that, the Smeller Reeves Mortimer first series started, you're in a couple of roles, background parts in that first series.
Yeah. Our third Frenchman, I seem to remember. That's right. I went up to somewhere near York, I seem to remember, and they had a director called Mr. Birkin. I can't remember his first
John
name.
Birkin.
Yes, presumably Romy Birkin is.
That's his
I
name.
don't know if it's named after him.
Maybe.
Well, they'll be onto something.
I don't know. But knowing him, he's nowhere like him in his manner. But people like to grab names, don't they?
Yes.
Stuff.
Yeah.
They were good at. They want that. Just on an aside, there, they were very good at. Jim had this thing of choosing names for people that were hilarious, but he didn't want to have comedy names, so he would always give people names, even like the puppets and characters were absurd. He would give them quite normal names. There was a puppet on the Albany shows. I can't remember if he went into TV, called Alan Davidson, the Cheeky Fox, but he was named after my flatmate, who they also knew vaguely from the Northeast school days or teenage years.
Yeah.
And there was another one called John. Anyway, the fox was funny in itself, but it was just a manky old puppet that they'd found in the market. But he was called Alan Davidson, the Cheeky Fox, rather than being called, some silly name. I think it made it better.
Yeah, but you don't get Labradors of all Greg Mitchell.
Well, no, exactly.
Usually, so that's a great name.
Oh, can I tell you the other interesting story about Greg Mitchell? Is that when it went to TV, I think that, after it was a second or third series of TV, when the dog was in the TV series, they originally, or the production company, wanted they chose a professional puppeteer to operate the dog. I think my memory is again, this is not 100% accurate, 'cause it's my memory of that that it didn't feel that they felt it was too professional. I think because there was something about what they did that there was they enjoyed, and I think the audience did also. They did enjoy a little bit of things being slightly not quite right. I wouldn't say unprofessional because that sounds wrong, but the things being a little bit slightly out. And so the dog, like the idea that the dog should maybe you should see the operator's hand occasionally and know that it's, and a puppeteer, obviously, she's professional. He wants to get everything right. And I seem to remember that it didn't quite feel right for them. So they said, and I seem to remember I was penciled in or slated, as I believe they say in the showbiz world, to play a part in one of the Smell Of. I think I was going to be Greg, a visual part, which is Cliff Mitchell, no, not Cliff Mitchell, Frank Boff. He was a nationwide presenter.
Yeah.
And they said, Dorian, we can't have that puppeteer. We got to have you. You know how to do the dog properly, and you put the hand up. And I mean, I don't know what I was doing, but apparently they liked it. So I did the dog the way I used to do it, and they preferred that than having the puppeteer.
Yeah.
But it meant I lost the job on, being visible as Frank Boff. So I didn't really get much visibility in the TV series, except when I was third Frenchman. Which apparently, so I was down back behind the desk, basically.
Yeah.
I'm not complaining.
No. Around that time, I said earlier, I've got the fan club newsletters, and there's a lot of talk just after the Smell of there being a series of 10-minute shorts, I think, with yourself and with Jim and Bob, called Dot on the Landscape.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you haven't done your research. Yes.
Yes, very sad. Which never came to fruition, but can you remember?
I do.
That was going to be.
I do remember what it was going to be, yes. And I always think of it as a confirmation of the fact that their famous phrases as no such thing as a free lunch are not being true, because the one thing I got out of that was the free lunch. Unfortunately, nothing else. But it was they came out, well, what happened was that in the interim between various series, that having got a taste of being on stage, but not actually being needed, understandably, I sort of missed it slightly. And I remember going up to Edinburgh. They did a show during one of the Edinburgh festivals. They just did a couple of days at one of the bigger theatres, and they invited me up to join them just for the fun of it. And I think I ended up filming the show for them from up in the gallery, and sort of slightly missing being part of it. being part of. It's not being part of their thing. Is it? Well, partly being part of that, and partly being on stage. So I think at that point I started to think I'd already thought, oh, maybe I should do something on my own, but I didn't really have the nerve because what I'd seen them do was so much better than most stand-ups I'd seen, and
Yeah.
so much different. I didn't feel like I wasn't clever enough to create something as good as what they'd done, and yet I didn't want to be yet another stand-up. So I held back a bit, and then I've gone off at a tangent here, so you have to remind me what you originally asked.
Dot on the landscape.
But what I'm saying is it came about because by then I'd actually established myself a bit as a stand-up.
Mm.
But it took me a while because I was, for the reason I've just said. And I bumped into an old school friend somewhere who said, oh, do you remember your mate Bob Bright at school? Yes. Oh, he's doing stand-up. Should we go and see him? Yes. So we went down to Elephant Castle and saw him at one of these rather bleak sort of open spot nights and a pub in the shopping centre at Elephant Castle. And he was so sort of, I'm sure you've been to some of these open spot nights. Sometimes they're not, they're mainly the performers and perhaps their girlfriends or boyfriends or chums and not much else. In fact, I think even some of the acts hadn't turned up. And so, because I'd done a couple of gags as the toff, I just said, rather on a whim to the chap who was running, I said, oh, if you're a bit short, I could do a couple of minutes if you want. He went, yeah, go on. And so I went and did a couple of minutes of gags, and he went, oh, I got like that. Yeah, I'll come.
Wow.
Next time. And so me and this chap, Bob Bright, went off and did the sort of open spot circuit together, because it can be quite a thankless task doing it on your own.
Yeah.
Far corners of places for not many audiences, not much of an audience, not much money, etc. And so that was, again, there was more fun because I did it with him.
Yeah.
And we are named out, and sometimes he'd get on, sometimes I would get on. Not one of us wouldn't get on, but you could have a drink and enjoy it. And even if it was awful, then we'd have our company. So and then I got quite a few. In the end, I got a bit better and got a few bookings. So yes, so a couple of years later, perhaps to their surprise, I sort of was doing all right at that. Yeah, and so they came up with this idea for Dot on the Landscape, which was I think it said in the I think I've still got the fax somewhere lying around in my archives, because they had an office which was actually Jules Holland's office above his next to his recording studio in East Greenwich. And I remember seeing them, and they say, yeah, we put this out to the agent or the production company, and it's a series of 10-minute shorts with you as a sort of new struggling comedian and us as your evil Svengalis. And they were going to, I think the idea was that I'd do it in various unlikely places, such as a sheltered accommodation, a old people's home, or a cruise ship, a working men's club, and that they would be like, I would be living in the back of the transit van, and they would have to somehow get a luxury hotel and all that kind of stuff. And that seemed to be going somewhere. I had the lunch. I was quite flattered and surprised, so they said, yeah, we could do something. And they put this forward, and we got to the stage of meetings and budgets, and I worked out, because it was only a fairly short thing, I could do it again in my time off. Although at that point I was wondering whether I should be giving up work or not, but it didn't seem to be necessary, because it would have taken, only a couple of weeks to film.
Yeah.
So, and, I think some dates were penciled in and some prices, etc. And then somewhere out of the blue, the BBC man changed his mind. That didn't happen.
A great lost show.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's the thing, but a lot of pilots and stuff, well, pardon the pun, but a lot of pilots and stuff, they never see the light of day, unfortunately. It's an idea, and it could be the best idea in the world, but,
Yeah.
if it's not picked up.
But I'm not bitter.
We can tell.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I've always said, I'm always very, quite seriously, I'm always being rather grateful to be involved, and the fact that they went perhaps even slightly beyond that, and they tried to do that for me, and other things, so things don't always go according to plan, but
yeah, but they're very loyal to their friends, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? To keep you working with them, they obviously saw something in you as a performer,
Yeah.
You know.
And you appeared on Radio Reeves Mortimer. You did a one-off
Yes.
on Radio 1, I think it was. So I think every week a comedian had an hour. Lenny Henry had one, and Dick and Bob one week. And you did some. You were the human joke box on there, I think.
Yeah. I think that's available on the YouTube, isn't it? And John Irving on that as well.
Yes, yes, he is.
Poem songs, and I think James Brown was in that one.
That's right. Yeah.
I think, well, it was about the time he launched Loaded magazine, but he was always a big fan of theirs. And, well, you know, like you said, the cover of The NME, which was...
you mentioned... Yes, indeed. You mentioned going out to Edinburgh, and it was in 93 or 94, I think you went up with a very young Matt Lucas, am I right?
Yes. Yeah.
Was that Bernard Chumley era?
Indeed, yes. Yeah. Yeah, that was when I was at my peak.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I probably wasn't at my peak of performing, but because I think looking back, I was probably not quite ready to do an Edinburgh show because I'd actually only been doing stand-up for a couple of years. But I got invited onto a small TV show on LWT, I think, and the lady that ran the theatre in Edinburgh saw it and liked it, said, "Oh, I'd like to give you your show at Edinburgh." And I went, "Oh, okay." And I didn't. I felt I didn't really know anything about how you do this because, you know, if I'd been a bit more of a jobbing comedian, you know, that's often the main topic of the conversation for 6 months of the year, the Edinburgh show. But I didn't really know anything about it. I knew people did it, but I didn't know how you did it. Didn't know how you. I knew I'd been offered the venue and I on reasonable terms and stuff. I'm like, oh, okay. Thing is, I only do about 10 minutes, 15, 20 at the most. These have to be an hour show. I couldn't really do it on my own. I wasn't ready for that. So I was thinking of who to get. And I'd met Matt at a club in Hampstead that we used to do, which seemed to, again, had a slightly collective feel to it. So the bloke that ran it sort of got people that he liked to put on a slightly more focused show rather than just the stand-ups. So he got me and Matt and Barrett able to do things, and he seemed like the best choice. Yeah,
he was so young, wasn't he? When
about 21, I think. Remember
the Bernard Chumley character? He was, you know, way beyond his years when he first started.
He was playing a man in his 60s, I suppose, and he's got a baby face anyway.
Yeah.
Even for his age. So
yeah.
Yes, and he used to use the week thing.
Yes.
I don't know if there's much material of him do it, because of course it seems odd to me now looking back that I have no footage of what we did at Edinburgh.
Yeah, there must be something out there because there are always people filming and
but not so much in the
audio and things.
You'd have to carry a great big around. You know, there wasn't camera phones and stuff.
Yeah. I think the only footage of your act on YouTube from my research is a Comedy Store TV show. Yeah.
Channel 5. That was one of the opening weeks of Channel 5, I think.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah.
It's a little grainy.
Yeah. I say, because Matt went on to Shooting Stars at George Dawes, but you were involved yourself when you were Dorian?
Oh, I was, well, I was the warm-up to the pilot episode of Shooting Stars. Yeah.
Right. I don't think Matt's in that one, is he, the pilot? I think
he wasn't in that first one.
No.
But they discovered him at this club that we used to do in Hampstead, because again they were another example of their loyalty, if you like. They used to come along even when they become quite famous in their own right. So going out to things was sort of starting to become like even more so now. But they were recognised and stuff like that. So, but occasionally they'd come along to stuff like I was doing, and Matt was on there, and they saw the potential. Yeah. So again, it's quite nice. There's a lot of nice little a lot of little coincidences, really, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, did you enjoy the challenge of stand up, or was that never really the goal?
Well, I don't know whether it was a goal or not, but I definitely enjoyed it. Yes. Yeah, and I only stopped doing it really a few years ago because when you're doing the sort of stand-up I did, which was very quick-fire gag, quite it's quite a lot of work to come up with new stuff because I wasn't one of the, couldn't sit down with a blank sheet of paper and write jokes. I used to see stuff that like I don't know, a newspaper headline or a slogan on a shop or something, and see some funny misunderstanding that could happen or whatever I'd come up with. But it was always meant to be a very quick joke. I wasn't one for long rambling observational stories. So, I might only come up with 5 seconds every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So my act, and that's fine because if you're going on stage live and not on TV very much, then hopefully the same people aren't going to see you that often, so it doesn't matter. I think I actually got bored myself with hearing the same gags about 6 or 7 years ago, and I felt that I was they probably needed a bit of refreshing, and that almost as challenging as starting again. And so I just sort of let it go a bit, really. But it was I did it for about 15 years with some success, so that's fine.
I mean, so have you drawn a line under that now, or is there scope to
only in a 2B pencil? Sort of yes and no, I think. Occasionally people ask me to do something. I did something at John Irwin's birthday party, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
And somebody else, actually about a year ago, a couple of younger comedians who I bumped into who knew my act, because I must have met them earlier in their careers, but I re-bumped into them. No, bumped into them. That's not mangle the language. Well, they said, why don't you come and do something at this? And so I did actually in 1 week, about a year ago, I did 2 gigs. But I hadn't done them in, a couple of years either side. And I said, I'm only going to do 2 minutes because I'm determined to do stuff that I've written recently rather than rest on my old stuff. So, but I don't think, I don't have a huge desire to go and up and do 20 minutes of gags to a group of people on a Saturday night. No, long end the game, isn't it?
I know. It's good to have so many strings to your bow as well. Do you know what I mean? That you can, if you fancy doing some stand up, you can do that, and it's nice to be.
I think if I was to do it again, I'd probably be self-indulgent and do a one-man show, but something a bit gentler, maybe. I had an exhibition in an art gallery a couple of years ago, which was basically a sort of memorabilia and photographs and reminiscences of my years as a teenage plane spotter. Some people suggested not only that I should write a book about it, but I should also do a live show. 3.5 years later, I haven't done it, but it's still at the back of my head.
Yeah.
Sounds like a plan.
I will.
But there's scope for everything these days, isn't there? You hear all these stories about, even like train spotting has become huge again. These guys are going, go pros.
Yeah, I know. There's that what's his name, Beaujolais, the chap?
Yeah, it is huge. It's I
think that I might have left it too long now.
No, you should be jumping on the plane aspect, I think, Dorian.
Do you still fly, Dorian? Are you a qualified pilot?
Yes, not that often. Just only for leisure. Like a little plane. Funnily enough, when going back to the show that me and Matt Lucas did at the Edinburgh Festival, we flew down to. He'd been at Bristol University at the time. I think he took a year out to do his performing, and the music that we wanted in the show was being done by an old colleague of his at Bristol University, and Mr. ATAC, and we said we need to go down to see him and have a chat and sort out the music. And I said, well, why don't we fly down? And he went, oh, okay, yeah. So so I rented a plane from Biggin Hill and we flew down to Bristol. I mean, a lot easier to get a train, really, but I thought we might as well. Things like
yeah.
And we followed the M4, very good landmark. And I left Matt in charge of the map, and which at one point was slightly. It always happens when you're flying. You always end up somewhere on the fold of the map. This is before GPS, of course.
Yeah.
And I said, can you unfold the map and get back to Bristol? And he opened it up, and it covered the whole window. Couldn't actually see where I was going. Nothing bad happened.
So where did you end up landing?
Hey?
Where did you land?
Filton. Oh, yeah, no, we did land near Bristol. I mean, we landed exactly where we intended to. The map in the window was only a brief. I've
got this vision of Matt parachuting, doing a James Bond and parachuting out of this plane, you know.
Back in the days when comedy was the new rock and roll, Vic and Bob really should have had a Victory's Big Night Out private jet, Led Zeppelin style, with you flying around the country, gig to gig.
Yeah.
Has Jim and Bob ever been up with you in the plane?
Yes, they did once, I seem to remember, yeah.
Don't know why I needed to know that.
We're covering all the facts. We want to cover all the bases.
You ask all the questions.
We ask all the questions.
I will ask the question.
Tori, thanks for joining us today. It's been absolutely fantastic to hear your stories. They really were quite a boast.
Thanks so much, Dorian.
Okay, that was excellent. Thank you.
Right, it's been good fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening to this edition of Quite a Boast. Special thanks to Matt Lucas for permission to use the Peanuts music as our theme tune, and thanks to Ed Lewis for this edit. Thank you to Jake Chesham for permission to use the photo from his 1995 shoot of Jim and Bob in our various online locations for the podcast. And of course, thank you very much to Jim Moir and Bob Mortimer, without whom this podcast, well, it just wouldn't exist, would it? Remember to check out Paula's Divine Comedians podcast as well, and to join the Reeves Mortimer Depository of Curious Stuff Facebook group. And I think you'll agree that really was a lot of fun. Goodbye.